I think that's what I love about podcasting is because when I'm having a conversation with somebody, I might have an outline of 10 questions, but once I start chatting with the person, I never know which direction it's going to go. And I think that part excites me. I love the chaos.
What makes you double down on podcast that much? What do you see in podcast that makes you feel that's the way to go?
I think the first thing that drew me to podcasting was
Today, we're joined by Adam R. Larson, co-host and producer of Count Me In, IMA's show diving into everything shaping the world of accounting and finance. Adam is also a senior leader in global learning and development, driving strategy, innovation, and collaboration across industries.
you can't really have a blog post when you're doing your morning run or you're doing your morning commute to work, but a podcast is that perfect thing that you can listen to in a short period of time. When it comes to a podcast, you're able to have meaningful and heartfelt conversations, but it was really just that format to really connect with people.
So that's the shiny side of podcasts. That's why people actually consume them. From the backstages, what are some of the biggest challenges that you faced as a podcaster?
That's a good question. There are different challenges that you face, but there's very similar challenges. I think.
Adam, can you tell me the story of Count Me In, please? Which is a podcast, by the way, for everybody listening to us.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here. So Count Me In was kind of a brainchild of, hey, we are a nonprofit accounting association, the Institute of Management Accountants, and we have thought leadership, we have research, we have courses, we have a certification that people can come get and ways to kind of advance themselves, but we're not meeting people where they're at. It's one of those things where when I first joined the team, I said, hey, we should have a podcast. And this was back in 2010 in the education team. And I said, we should have a podcast. And they looked at me, I was crazy. I was into podcasts, but I guess the rest of the organization didn't really understand what podcasts were. And finally, fast forward to about 2019, a colleague of mine, I had told him about my idea about the podcast. He said, let's do it. And then we kind of had to lay the groundwork to build our case of why podcasting was important, quick, to the ground. You can talk with people. You don't have to worry about formal CPE, continuing professional education. You don't have to worry about, hey, make sure that it matches all these things. Let's just have a conversation and get stories out there and understand what people want to hear and just have real world accounting and finance professionals come and talk to their peers in a nice conversational format. And so that was kind of the brainchild behind Count Me In, of getting out there, making sure that we can see that accounting and finance professionals are human as well, that we deal with real things, and that, even the soft skills deal with accounting and finance professionals have to have the soft skills as well, not just the accounting and those financial expertise that they bring, but also you need the soft skills. You need to have good leadership skills. You have a good change management and all the other aspects that people forget, that even the accounting and finance professional needs that as well.
Why did you choose the podcast, though, to advocate for all this? And asking this, I'm like, you can also go to conferences, right? You can write blog posts. You can have a YouTube channel. Why the podcast specifically?
You're right. And we do have a conference. We do have blogs. We do have a YouTube channel. So we have all those things. I think we wanted to find another avenue to allow for open conversation, because blog posts are a lot of times are overly edited. Not that blogging is bad, but sometimes you have to get it just right. When it comes to a podcast, you're able to have meaningful and heartfelt conversations that, yes, you do edit podcasts because sometimes people make mistakes. Sometimes not everything is live, but it was really just that format to really connect with people, so that you can't really have a blog post when you're walking, doing your morning run or you're doing your morning commute to work. But a podcast is that perfect thing that you can listen to in a short period of time. They don't have to be super long. They don't have to be overly. There's a certain time and a place for the long form 2-hour podcast that goes on YouTube that people watch for hours on end. And we all know those podcasts. But this is more for, hey, short, quick, 30 minutes conversation that you can connect with, that you can learn something from. And I think that was the real brainchild. And at first we were like, hey, we'll have somebody just answer the questions to us and they'll record that, and then we'll record the questions. And then we quickly realized how disconnecting that was. And so we started having the conversations live, because when you have the conversations live, you can go on different rabbit trails as conversations naturally do. No conversation is always strictly to the point. There's conversations that kind of go all over the place. But as long as you kind of keep things within the topic that you're looking for, it turns out to be a really nice thing.
Amen to that. So tell me a bit more about the business behind it, Adam. So there is this non-for-profit accounting firm. Like, how does it work exactly?
Yeah, so the Institute of Management Accountants is a not-for-profit accounting association. They've been around since 1917, I believe. It was originally under a different name, focusing on cost accounting, but then they kind of broadened it to management accounting, the Institute of Management Accountants. And so the real goal there is to help move the profession forward, the accounting and finance profession forward. So I'm sure everybody's heard of the CPA, which more focuses on tax and auditing and those types of things. But the management accountant is your internal accounting team, your CFO, your FP&A professional, even your accounts payable and accounts receivable. Like all of those folks are included in that accounting team. And so the IMA is their goal is to get out there and advance the profession, help accounting and finance professionals do their best. And also we have a certified management accounting professional certification. And so what that does is allows people to get certified to show that they are an expert in management accounting. And so that's kind of what IMA does in our, we go out there and we connect with the internal accounting teams, helping them increase their knowledge so that they can be better and help lead their teams and help lead their organizations to do better things. The accounting and finance professional is a strategic partner in with your team. They're not just the bean counters, which is the traditional, the accounting person has their hat on, they're with the crunching numbers. Yes, the accounting team does look at the numbers, but they're also looking at the bigger picture and the bigger strategy for organizations. And they're that business partner that to really help tell the story of what's happening within an organization. That's who IMA is. And so the Count Me In podcast is the podcast for the IMA, helping show different professionals, whether we talk to people who are members, people who are certified, people who are not connected to the organization at all, but we're trying to get all those stories that you see out there, as opposed to just the traditional way of talking about things. And sometimes it's easy to get caught up in rules and regulations and those things are good to report on, and we have other ways of showing those things, but the podcast really focuses on the stories and the people.
And how is the podcast helping IMA? Like, how do you position it in a way that will both serve the industry, right? Because I understand that that's the whole point as well, telling the stories of people walking the talk. But at the same time, I mean, you have a responsibility towards IMA, right? So how do you tie the podcast and the association together?
Well, we tie it a lot of times in topics, whether it's, hey, we want to make sure we're focusing on AI and finance, or we want to focus on some sort of leadership topic or some sort of, there's different topics that we like to focus on as an organization. And a lot of times I try to tie the topics that I'm talking with my speakers to back to those things. The other thing is if a speaker's coming in and writing an article, and sometimes that article is really interesting and they want to expound upon it, I'll bring them on the podcast, or we'll bring in people who've done research reports and we'll bring them onto the podcast to talk about it in a different way. So a lot of times we try to find those connections to other things somebody's doing. Like I had somebody create a course on behavioral finance, and I had that person come on the podcast so he could talk about behavioral finance in a different way than he talked about it there, to kind of spark people's interest and help understand the topic a little differently. And so that's how we kind of connect back and forth. And there's times where the speaker doesn't connect to the main organization at all, and they're just somebody who came on just to have that conversation. So I tie it in as much as I can to make sure that speakers or different folks who are doing different things for IMA, whether they're speaking at a conference or writing an article, and there's ways to kind of talk about that topic in a new format, because writing is very formal. Courses have to be very formal. And sometimes you can learn something new about a topic if you talk about it or have a conversation about it and kind of look at it from a different perspective. And I think that's the real goal with the podcast, is to say, hey, this is a way to talk about this, but from a whole different perspective than maybe you've read about it. Or maybe you've read about it and you're interested, but you want to learn more. So, hey, or come on the podcast and we'll talk about it. Come here, listen to this speaker. Come listen to this author on the podcast. And you'll be like, oh, okay, now I understand what they're talking about because I've heard it from a different perspective.
I love this, Adam. So you really believe in podcasts because you actually have another one, right? Which is more on the personal side of things.
Yes.
So what makes you, because you mentioned it, right? For IMA, you have the conferences as well. You have the blog, you have the YouTube channel. But what makes you double down on podcasts that much? What do you see in podcasts that makes you feel that's the way to go?
I think the first thing that drew me to podcasting was audio. I love audio. I'm an audiophile. I love creating audio. I love editing audio. And when I'm not doing my 9 to 5 day job, I'm doing audio outside there. I edit audio. I work with my wife. We've created an organization where we help young people get better at singing, and they come for lessons, and they also come into my studio, and they might record auditions, or I might help them sound good so that they can send that out to different people. And so we're really passionate about helping young people reach their full potential, especially when it comes to singing and recording and playing music and stuff like that. And so I think my first passion comes from the audio side of things. But then I've kind of really come to love podcasting in a way. And it really goes back to the ability to have conversation. The other podcast that I do with my wife called the Larson Parade, it is more of a personal podcast where we kind of talk about our life and what's happening and different things like that. But again, it's really comes back to just having conversation with people. In this case, a lot of times it's my wife and I just having conversation back and forth. And sometimes that's some of the most interesting podcasts that you have. Like people love those long form podcasts, like whether it's, your armchair experts or your Joe Rogans or something like that. Those are very long podcasts, but people love them because of the conversation that's created in them. Whether you agree with what they're doing or not, that's a whole nother story. But people love those type of podcasts because they love the conversation. And I think I love that in conversation can come out really passionate and really interesting things from people because and we've even brought friends over to our podcast and we've interviewed them and talked about their love because we want to, in our podcast, we really want to talk about love and how love kind of confounds because like we're both a second chance at love relationship. And it's a really, it's a really cool story. And every time we've told people about it, they're like, oh, that's really interesting. And so we're like, hey, what if we just shared it and just put it out there? And it's funny because we had all these ambitions of doing that podcast and we recorded a few episodes and then ran out of time and just things got busy. And so I do put myself to the ringer there because it's like that's a podcast I do on the side. And those are actually longer than my Count Me In podcast. So they take longer to edit, things like that. But I think I love sharing story with people and I love encouraging people to, see things from a new perspective and a new light and being able to share my story. If that's going to encourage somebody, if that's going to help somebody in their journey somehow, then I want to be a part of that.
And that makes a lot of sense. So that's the shiny side of podcast, right? That's why it's so cool. That's why it works. And that's why people actually consume them. From the backstages, right? What have been, and let's look at both podcasts, right? Because it's very interesting. There is one which is much more corporate focused, almost B2B, right? And one which is much more personal, not even catering to a B2C audience, but more like everybody who might find, you and your wife's chat relevant to their lives to improve and to get inspiration from real life stories. So that said, what are some of the biggest challenges that you faced as a podcaster going through those two podcasts?
That's a good question because there are different challenges that you face, but there's very similar challenges. I think with the personal podcast, it was recognizing, oh, wait, this is going to take a lot more time than I thought I was going to give it to it and making the time I needed for that. I think the other side of it is learning how to have conversations on the fly, learning how to think on your feet. If you're not used to conversing with somebody live and not sure what's going to be said, it can be scary at first. You're treading water lightly, and sometimes you mess up your words. Sometimes you start being the king, like I think and the platform we're recording on, if you use the AI portion, they're going to take all those little that I was giving as an example. They'll try to take all those out because there's new AI features that you can say, hey, take out all the ahs and the ums and the filler words, And so I think the biggest thing I had to overcome was learning how to speak to people, how to really, because I've always been able to chat. I can do small talk with folks, but never have engaging I had to learn how to have an engaging conversation. I had to learn how to think on my feet. I am a huge fan of jazz, and I think that's what I love about podcasting because it feels a lot like creating jazz. Like you have a basic structure for your song if you're doing a jazz song, but when it comes to the solo portion, everybody has to improvise their little part and has to like do something different, do something new. And I think that's what I love about podcasting is because when I'm having a conversation with somebody, I might have an outline of 10 questions. I might have an idea of where it's going to go, but once I start chatting with the person, I never know which direction it's going to go. And I think that part excites me. I love the chaos. I love the organized chaos of jazz. And I think that's what I love about podcasting conversations, the organized chaos. One of the other challenges is marketing, getting your stuff out there, the amount of little snippets you have to create, the amount of times you have to post those things, I think are a big challenge. I released my first season with my wife in my personal podcast, And we didn't really do much marketing besides just a few things out there. But then realizing the amount of work it takes to create all those little elements, when I do the corporate podcast, I sometimes can get help from the marketing teams. Other people can help me. But when you're doing all of it by yourself, it kind of becomes a huge burden on you. Getting new listeners is difficult because you're trying to widen your net, but you have to either, do paid marketing or do different things to get your name out there. And that's not an easy thing, and it's not a cheap thing to do. And so I think that's a big challenge that I've had to overcome. And I'm still learning how to do it because there's not really a set way. And sometimes it's like, oh, there's some organizations that we'll guarantee you 1,000 listeners if you just sign up with us. And I'm like, so I'm paying for you to get me downloads? Like, how does that work? And it's getting your name out there and reaching out. And I think those are some of the biggest challenges. And then it's just, technology, like my personal podcast. I don't have video set up because it's my wife and I sitting in our room. I don't have a good camera and all that stuff set up. So it's like, well, it's just going to be audio for now. And that's okay. It's great when you have platforms like Riverside out there, which is really good, which I use for the Count Me In podcast, which I love Riverside. It's a great tool. Some of the AI editing, it makes it easier to go through it and edit it. When I first started the podcast, I was recording in Zoom and I did all the audio. We were just doing the audio, and I did all the audio edits myself by hand. And so one podcast, 30 minutes of audio could take you an hour and a half to edit because you have to go through very slowly and edit those things. So with the rise of technology and the rise of things like AI, they've kind of made some of those things faster. And then also, writing descriptions and stuff like that can be very difficult, especially if you're not a writer yourself, really, per se. And so, I've used tools. There's tools like CastMagic out there where you can load your audio in there and it can give you beautiful writings and stuff like that. So finding the right tools has been a challenge, but once I found them, I was like, this is great. I love this.
So what tools do you recommend then, Adam? Because time, right, that it takes to produce a podcast, post-produce a podcast, market a podcast. There is so much that goes into there indeed, especially for people who don't really know all the tools available nowadays. So what tools do you personally use, whether that's in a corporate context or with your wife, with your personal podcast? What would you recommend using to better manage and, make most out of people's time when it comes to producing and publishing a podcast?
For sure. I mean, the first tool you should always have is have a good microphone. You want your podcast to sound good. The last thing you want to do is you have your users have somebody listen to your podcast. And if it doesn't sound right or doesn't sound good, there's a big chance that they're not coming back to listen to another episode once you've fixed the sound. So have a good microphone so that it sounds good. I've got the little Shure one here. You can see them if you're looking at the video portion of this one. You can see I've got a Shure microphone. Those are great. There's Blue microphones out there. There's Rode microphones. There's so many good ones out there that plug in USB that are really easy plug and play to use. I advise having a great microphone because you want good sound. Riverside is great as a great tool. We've already mentioned that one. CastMagic is great you can load your audio in there and have it uses like a ChatGPT type AI where it reads your thing, so you have less hallucinations because it's using your audio and your text as its basis for writing descriptions, titles. You can write introductions. You can have it help you write LinkedIn posts. That's a great tool. For my personal one, I don't necessarily use these tools because we do a lot of the recording in home. We'll record if we're interviewing someone, we'll record like on a Zoom with the free account. I use Pro Tools for editing the audio for that particular one. If you are doing video-based podcasting, if you are doing it online, you just have a good 1080p camera. You can get 4K cameras. Not all systems actually record in the 4K, but the higher quality the camera can be, the better quality it can be online. If you're going to do in-studio type stuff, you'll need a nice camera. You'll need a whole crew if you're going to do an in-studio thing, or you'll have to rent a place, which can get really, really expensive. You can do everything CastMagic does just by utilizing one of the tools. You can just say, hey, based on my transcript of this particular thing, you can write the best prompt in any of the tools that are out there. So those are some of the tools that I've used that I find very successful.
So I love that the first thing that you mentioned is quality. And that's something I think we don't stress enough. Obviously, when it comes to B2B podcasting, a lot of brands will anyways want to have a certain level of quality. But there is such a huge difference between a good final audio and a poor one. I'm going to challenge you on a couple of things here, Adam. So I agree with the microphone, right? And right now, I'm not in my podcast recording studio because I'm moving out. So I have a Apple earphones microphones, which sounds okay, just to be clear. But there is a lot we can do in post-production as well, right? So yes, having great microphone is key and is the base of everything. There are some ways now to get average plus audio into a good quality audio. If you know what you're doing in post-production, there are some tools for that as well. Video, right? Video as well, 200% as a reminder. YouTube claimed 1 billion monthly podcast users in February 2025. So like having good enough video quality gives you access to a whole lot of audience that, I mean, you wouldn't be able to tap into if it wasn't for video. So yeah, 100%. Leveraging good quality to begin with is key. And that's actually what's going to be the difference between a not successful podcast and a successful podcast. And then there are a bunch of tools out there. So CastMagic, I'm on the website right now. I had an idea of the tool. Basically, you put a content asset in there from a podcast, for instance, and it spits out like email newsletter, LinkedIn post, long form articles, timestamps, overview, and show notes, and so on and so forth. How do you recommend, Adam, marketing a podcast? Like what goes into this, why, and how do you do it?
Podcast marketing is really like little snippets that you can share. A lot of times I'll do a LinkedIn post, which is more wording, but then I try to create a little snippet. So whether it's using Riverside has some great tools where you can say, hey, they break it up into little snippets and you can pull quotes that way. You can use tools like Headliner, which is really nice, where you can put the audio and have like pictures in there and you can have the audio file playing. That's a nice one as well. Being able to kind of have little snippets that little quotes. It's really just, it's finding the right quotes that will kind of grab somebody's attention and want them to kind of go out and listen for more. And I think that's the biggest thing. I try to use tools to help me find those quotes because sometimes I can't always think of them. I don't always see them right away. So whether it's using CastMagic or there's some other tools out there that I haven't used in a while, but I use like a lot of times I'll use CastMagic to find the right quotes, or I've loaded transcripts into an AI engine and say, hey, based on this transcript, what's a quote that people might find interesting? Like find me 10 quotes that people might find interesting, and I'll listen to them, I'll read them and see if they're good. And being able to put those out there for users to, you want to grab their attention. Like just with any marketing, you want a headline that'll grab somebody's attention to want to learn more. It's the same thing with little video snippets. You want that little video snippet to say, hey, that's an interesting thing. Can I click to learn more? Or I want to hear the rest of that conversation. And that's really what it comes down to, is you want to drive people to listen to the full podcast. But a lot of times they might only hear that one snippet. So find a nice snippet that really captures them in. Then they might think, oh, I heard that interesting snippet on this podcast. Let me go there. And so finding ways to kind of get exposure. And I think that's the biggest thing with podcasting is you have to get more and more exposure. And like right now I'm planning for season 2 of my personal podcast, and we've already recorded a couple episodes. We're planning and we're getting some people to come in. And so like for that particular one, we're doing seasons because that's what I can handle. But for my corporate podcast, I release one every single week. We don't take breaks, and we just kind of keep going. And so they're different models, but with the season one, I like the idea you can plan ahead and you can kind of get all that stuff ready ahead of time, so that when it's time to release them, you can just press the release and then send your social media posts and stuff like that and have all that stuff planned ahead, as opposed to kind of the continuous never closing, just doing it all the time. So there's 2 different models. They both have their place, but the model of it's always, the podcast is always happening. Then you're always having to create content. And sometimes some of the podcasts we don't get necessarily promote like the other ones, or we might find one, we think this one's interesting, so we'll put more materials in that one. But the other one might just get 1 or 2 posts as opposed to more posts. So it just depends on what the availability of the team is as well.
So I love this. I'm going to chime in a bit of this one. So social media, super important. Now, for the people listening to us right now who've done some social media posts out of their podcast content, they might have noticed that it often isn't going to move the needle in terms of direct podcast downloads. What do I mean with this? When people find out about a short, right, from your podcast content and they like it, what they're going to want more of is more shorts like this, right? They naturally won't necessarily go to your long form. Only a very small fraction of them will. So if the objective is to get more long form downloads out of your short form content, what we found works pretty well is swinging for the fences. You don't want to have like all of the shorts at 10, 20,000 views each. If you can, that's great. But that's not what's going to move the needle. What you want is to try and optimize for short form content that will reach every once in a while, say once every fortnight or even once a month, 1 million views, 2 million views in your niche. That high view, high impact short form of content will drive traffic towards the long form, because there is such a large volume that some people will be like, geez, this is so good, I'm going to check it out. Now, does that mean you shouldn't do social media? 100% not. You should do social media, because that's also going to build an audience for you on those platforms. And by showing up consistently and by posting regularly, you are going to build that community as well on other platforms out of content you're already recording anyways. So I love that that's the one you insist on, Adam, because I agree with it. I think it's still important to manage expectations, especially of podcasters, because they think they're going to publish 6 times a week on social media and their downloads are going to explode. It doesn't work that way. There is a way, but it's not just posting. And selecting the right content you mentioned, I think putting the right hook at the beginning is key as well. Leveraging tools like CastMagic will definitely help. Testing and iterating typically is really good as well. So something I love to ask all my guests, Adam, is a bit inspired from Jeff Bezos, actually. When Jeff Bezos was building Amazon, right, he was not asking himself what's going to change in 10 years, what's going to be the next innovation in 10 years. He was asking himself, what's still going to be true in 10 years that is true today? People are still going to want fast delivery. They're still going to want broad and large amount of choices within their products, cheap ideally, and great customer service. So if we nail those points properly, we will still be alive in 10 years and we will perform. In your professional, to say the least, opinion, what's the thing that is true in podcast today that will remain true in 10 years?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Thank you.
That's a really interesting question. It's funny because with the rise of things like Notebook LLM, where you can load in a bunch of your stuff and it spits out this, this interactive podcast with 2 different people and they're having this engaging conversation that's all AI built. I sometimes wonder, like, are things like that going to take over some of the short form podcasts, or are things like that going to kind of take over? But I think one thing that's going to stay true in podcasting is that human to human connection and conversation. Like those Notebook LLM ones, they're fun to listen to and they're like 5 minutes long, but they don't have the same dynamic and the same interesting connection that a human conversation has. Now, 10 years from now, who knows where the technology is going to advance to, and will the robots take over the world? Who knows? I'm a Terminator fan, so who knows what's going to happen? But I feel like the human connection and that ability to show humans interacting and having engaging, thoughtful conversations in the form of a podcast, I think that part's going to stay the same. Our technology may change. It might be cartoon versions of us in the video because we can't do videos anymore, but it'll still be that human connection. That's going to stay, I believe.
Human to human. Couldn't
Yeah.
agree more. And actually, if you look at Notebook LLMs, it isn't performing as well as people thought it would. I think it's great. It's a great tool for students, for instance, who want to learn about a specific topic, like fantastic. But like at the end of the day, especially in B2B, B2C, what people are going to look for is human stories, human connections.
Exactly.
And as long as we can provide this with a channel like podcast, I think podcast has good days ahead of itself. Adam, thank you so much for coming on Podcast Gurus. If people want to find out more about you, what you do, or your 2 podcasts, where should they go?
They should go to LinkedIn, find me on there, because that's probably where everything's connected, and connect with me there. And I'd love to chat with you more, like ask me questions. Let's get to know each other.
Let's do it. We'll put all the links in the description. Adam, thank you so much for coming on Podcast Gurus.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.